I'll start with Professor Yin's questions. The first question was, I should list the legal risk in international project finance. That was the first. We did the research in such a way that we identified the various legal risks and we separated them into the different chapters so we could easily analyze them. So inadequate legislation for project finance, both at the national and international levels, is a risk. Change of law is also a risk. Then the dispute settlement mechanisms available at the moment also constitute a risk in international project finance. These are the major risks. Then the mitigating circumstances. I identify binding international law to be a perfect mitigating circumstance against all the risk. Because if good law is defined with adequate binding force and everybody respects the law, those risks will be solved and we're going to have litigations in court and infringed parties are going to be compensated according to the law. Again, we also have legal familiarity. By legal familiarity, I'm talking about defining law in such a way that if you move from one jurisdiction to another, you meet the same law or almost the same kind of law. I leave from China, I go to Japan, it's the same law governing project finance. As such, it's going to be easy to deal with project finance. And the risk of inadequacy or the risk of unfamiliarity, legal unfamiliarity, is going to be dismissed from the circles of international project finance. Then again, we need to develop an adequate international dispute settlement mechanism suited entirely to international project finance. That's my first recommendation, because the present mechanisms for the resolution of international dispute settlement does not tie naturally or squarely with project finance. It can tie in with other forms of foreign direct investment, but not entirely with international project finance. Then the second question is why I chose the topic. First of all, I must say that I am very interested in international investment law. And then, at the moment, my country is projecting to be an emerging country by the year 2035. And in order for my country to be emergent in 2035, the government has identified mechanisms or tools that can facilitate this movement towards emergence. And they have decided to put in place certain structural projects. And amongst the structural projects, like the Kribi Seaport, which is being constructed, one of the participating companies there is the company that constructed the Three Gorges Dam in Niger. So it gives me that impetus to try to see what international project finance is going to be. Initially, I wanted to study this from my country, but I did not have enough literature, so I couldn't do it. And the main theoretical element in international project finance now is that it's not yet developed theoretically. It's difficult to find many experts in international project finance as of now. And the few that are there are still coming out with confusing ideas. So it is better that we look at international project finance from the various elements, which of course I chose the legal risk, to be able to define what project finance is. As such, we can attain a certain level of theoretical maturity in international project finance. Then again, for the practical perspective, it is important that the lawyers or the researchers research into project finance, the legal risk that exists in project finance, and come out with legal solutions. Because whether the risk is environmental, the risk is social, economic, commercial, or whatever, the last area of solution lies in the law. If your commercial rights are violated, your environmental rights are violated, economic rights are violated, you can only have that remedy, that satisfaction of justice when you come back into the law. So that is the practical significance of selecting this topic.
Okay, thank you for your answers. I'm satisfied.
You're welcome, Prof. Okay, Professor Jen, the most famous silent risk. I'm going to start with silent risk. Yeah. I coined the term silent risk. I coined it silent because when you read the literature surrounding international dispute settlement nowadays, it is projected as the best solution, as the best mechanism. It is projected as that which is containing no risk. But from my research, I identified the fact that it is a risk. And because it is not spoken about, because it is not written about, because most scholars don't talk about it, about the negative element or the risk found in it, I coined it silent. It is sleeping, it is silent, it is not making any noise, but it is a risk. That is why I coined it silent. And the second question?
Do you think most of the risks are silent most of the time?
No, I don't think most of the risks are silent most of the time. Because when you read the literature surrounding international investment law in a broader perspective, international investment law, you realize that they identify all the other risks: unstable legal environment, lack of legislation, corruption, all the other type of risks. Everybody talks about it all the time. And when they talk about it at the end of the research or at the end of the paper, they tell you, go the direction of the international dispute settlement. Meaning that that is the solution. There is no problem at that level. So I am awakening it. I'm trying to reawake it. I want us to know that it is a risk in international project finance.
Just go on to the second, just for fun.
Do you think this kind of risk is a legal risk?
The dispute settlement, international project finance?
Yeah.
I think it's a legal risk because dispute settlement, international project finance, is handled in the legal aspects of project finance. It handles the other legal risk. The publicity we receive nowadays is that the dispute settlement mechanisms available are a solution to the risks that are available, and they are handled by lawyers. They are handled by competent judges, and it is guided by the law. So, and it is handled in a judicial environment. So I think it's a legal risk.
Okay.
Then Professor Jones' second question was about the role of the power of the UN in regulating project finance. I decided to look at the power of the United Nations in regulating project finance because I looked at it from a historical perspective. Before the UN is what it is today, at the creation of the United Nations and the World Bank, the United Nations was concerned most importantly with political regulation. And as such, they had the powers to make laws. And the Havana Charter that was discussed in Cuba in 1948 was aimed at regulating international investment. And international project finance is an element of international investment. So I decided to look at it from this perspective because I knew that international project finance is international investment. And at one point in time, the United Nations had wanted to develop international regulation on international investment. That is the first point to look at it from that perspective. Then the second point of looking at it from that perspective is the issue of human rights. The United Nations is developing laws that are regulating human rights. The two chapters on human rights were defined by the United Nations. And then there are some elements wherein the projection of the international project finance affect human rights. Like in the Dhaka project in India, where there were a lot of human rights abuses because of the project. there were a lot of environmental catastrophes because of the project. The United Nations lacked the binding force or lacked the adequate resolution, adequate legal mechanisms to regulate international project financing from that perspective. As such, I think and I believe very firmly that if the United Nations decides to develop law like the Rome Statute of 1998, creating the International Criminal Court, where they don't put so much influence on respect of territorial sovereignty, they can be able to regulate international project finance from this negative element. Because we see what happened in India was actually a violation of human rights, and the United Nations prides itself in the protection of human rights. So if that element could be covered by the United Nations, I don't think that the citizens of India were going to suffer as they suffered